What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the Home Field Podcast. We are currently on episode 12. So, in today's episode, basically just going to go over the Week 9 matchups that we had this past weekend in the NFL. We'll just recap each game a little bit and then move on to the next one. Also, we'll get into a little bit of college football today. Just going to go over the top 10 teams in the AP Top 25 in college football. Also, talk a little bit about the upcoming NBA season, as the NBA and the NBA Players Association have agreed on the 2020-2021 season. And then the episode's going to start out with just an epic rant on my experience going to Raymond James Stadium the other day when the Buccaneers played the Saints. Should be a fun episode to listen to, you guys. Hope you guys enjoy it, and let's get to it. All right, so I've devoted pretty much the first segment of the episode today to the Bucs versus the Saints on Sunday. So I went to the Bucs game at Ray J on Sunday night, and I was with my buddy Ryan just because I thought it would be a pretty cool experience for him to witness some Tom Brady greatness. I mean, you're watching the greatest quarterback of all time go up against a really good quarterback, one of the greatest of all time as well, in Drew Brees. And I figured that'd be just a cool experience. And to be honest with you, that was my first NFL game since like 2004. I remember I went to a preseason game at Gillette Stadium back in 2003 or 2004. They ended up playing the Eagles that year in the Super Bowl. But it was just kind of ironic that the preseason game that I went to in 2004, it's 2004 if I remember right, that those two teams would match up in the Super Bowl at the end of the year. I just thought that was kind of cool. But transitioning back to this game, it was just nice to actually go back to an NFL football game and just kind of see it from the stands this time and not usually watch it from home. I remember I was telling my buddy Ryan, it was kind of weird just watching a Sunday night football game without Al Michaels and Chris Collinsworth talking or commentating the entire game. So it was just nice to actually watch the game live with everybody spread out because of the whole COVID restriction thing, which, to be honest with you, the whole COVID thing that they have set up at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, to be honest with you, I actually kind of liked it because now you don't have to worry about, constantly getting up to, either go to the bathroom or go get food and constantly bumping into people as you're trying to get to the staircase to get to wherever you need to go. But with all that said, let's talk about the game itself. So I was in the mindset that the Bucs were going to win that game. I thought it'd be a competitive game. I thought it would be, probably maybe like a 10-point win for the Bucs. And as soon as the game started, the Bucs get the ball. They go 3-and-out in the first drive, and then after that, the only way that I can describe this, it was a massacre. My buddy Ryan and I witnessed a massacre that on Sunday night. It was ridiculous. So the Saints on their first 5 drives score 4 touchdowns, and honestly, they should have had 5 if it wasn't for Jared Cook fumbling the ball on the 2-yard line. And to flip it back on the Bucs here, the Bucs, I think, had like 1 or 2 first downs in the entire first half. They couldn't get anything going offensively, and the defense was atrocious. It's one of those games like where if you're watching at home, it's getting bad when it's probably the end of the first quarter or just going into the second quarter, and the home team's already down 21-0. But being there at the stadium, it's even worse because the fans were basically saying that we want Jameis in the game. And Jameis is the backup quarterback for the Saints. And most of the time, throughout most of the season, he's usually got a clipboard in his hand usually just watching the game. And it's just, it's a completely different experience when you're at the stadium. And this is honestly like where like the fans definitely showed out. Like they'll love Brady until it goes sideways. And Sunday night it went absolutely sideways. I'm just gonna be honest here for a second. I've pretty much watched the overwhelming majority of Tom Brady's career. I don't really remember much of the first couple of years he was with New England. I was just too young. But by and large, I know most of the games that Tom Brady's played in. To me, there's only 3 games where he's played as bad. I'll take that back. There's only 2 games where he played as bad as he did on Sunday night. He had a game against the Buffalo Bills, I believe in 2003. They went on the road and they lost 31-0. They got absolutely smoked that game. He played terrible. And then going to 2014, that debacle in Kansas City, where they lost like 41-14. Everybody was saying that Tom Brady was they were saying his career was over. They weren't even saying that the Patriots season was over. They were saying that Tom Brady's career looked like it was coming to an end just because of how bad that he played against Kansas City that night. And then we go back to Sunday night. Sunday night was, in my opinion, the worst game I've ever seen Tom Brady play. They couldn't get anything going. The only saving grace of that game, because we stayed basically till the end of the game, was them getting a late field goal in the fourth quarter. Once they got that, we left. That's how bad it was. We literally just stayed to see if we could get a field goal from the Bucs. And that was really kind of the only silver lining to that game. Outside of that, nothing for the Bucs worked out. The defense looked awful. The coaching was awful. Whatever scheme that they had was just garbage. Because, I mean, it was 28-0. It was either 28-0 or 31-0 at halftime. I mean, the game's over. There's no way you can come back from that. I know Brady has led a bunch of comebacks in his career when he was with the Patriots, but not that. There's just no way. The Bucs, I think if I look back at the time of possession in the first half, I mean, it was 2-1 in favor of the Saints. It really didn't feel like the Bucs had the ball that much in the first half. And whenever the Saints got the ball back, they were pretty much scoring every single drive. And it was just one of those things like where I'm sitting in the stands just watching the game, and I couldn't really believe it. Like as it's unfolding, it's just like I was really expecting the Bucs to get this win, and not only is it going the completely opposite way, we go to the one game where it is arguably, in my opinion, it is Tom Brady's worst game as a quarterback for whatever team that he's on. Out of all the games that my buddy Ryan and I pick to go see the Bucs, to go see Tom Brady, it is the worst game that he's ever played. And not only that, it looked like he couldn't do much. The Saints were bringing constant pressure the entire game. The offensive line could not block. I think Brady ended up getting sacked like 4 or 5 times. If he didn't get sacked that much, it sure as hell felt like it, because he was pretty much getting knocked down every 2 or 3 plays whenever they threw the ball. And they basically decided that they were only going to pass against the Saints. They made no effort to run the ball whatsoever. They only ran the ball 4 times the entire game. Now, I understand that they were down early and that they were trying to make it up to get some sort of comeback going. But they made no effort whatsoever to run the ball. It honestly seemed like Ronald Jones, Leonard Fournette, and LaShawn McCoy basically should have been inactive if they were going to be non-factors in the run game. So it was just an absolute nightmare watching that whole debacle unfold. I mean, I even heard Josh Freeman's name get brought up once or twice in the stands. Like that, you don't hear that ever. Like Josh Freeman is like one of the most scrub quarterbacks you could ever think of in Bucs history. And for his name to get brought up in the stands by the fans, that's how bad that game was on Sunday. So I do have tickets to another Bucs game at the end of the year. I think they're playing the Falcons, I think, in January. The only thing I'm going to say is Brady better just have a decent game. That's all I'm asking for. I'm only asking for one touchdown. If he could throw one touchdown in that game, that's good enough with me. Because the game that he had is just unlike anything that I've ever seen. It's just I'm gonna have nightmares about that game until I see the Falcons in January. Until I see the Bucs versus the Falcons in January. It's just, for my first NFL experience since I was a little kid, it did not go well. So now that that's out of the way, because usually I try to give facts a lot of the time. I at least try to be somewhat objective. This is all passion. This is all emotion, because this is my favorite quarterback. Now, granted, it's not on my favorite team. I'm the most bandwagon Bucs fan you will ever find. I'm only there really to watch Brady and Gronk. And it was just an absolute massacre that unfolded on Sunday night. That I'm just gonna leave it at that. It's just I don't even know really what else to say about that game. That game was just a nightmare to watch. So we'll wrap up the little rant that I had for the Bucs there, and we'll talk about Week 9. We'll just recap the week here. So Texans versus the Jaguars. The Texans beat the Jags 27-25. To be honest with you, I didn't really have a lot of high hopes for this game anyway. Both teams are basically out of the playoff race. At this point, they're really just kind of playing for positioning in the draft coming for next year. So Texans get the win there, 27-25. Giants versus Washington. Now, this game actually kind of means something because by some miracle, both teams are actually still in the playoff race, even though that they're under 500 and both teams just aren't really that good. So we get the Giants beating the Washington football team 23-20. I thought this game was going to be kind of similar to what I kind of predicted last week. Going to be a close game just because it's a divisional game. And it pretty much lived up to the expectation that I thought it would have. I thought Daniel Jones was okay. He threw for 212 yards, had a touchdown. I had Wayne Gallman on my fantasy team, so he chipped in, got me like 15 points. Had a decent day running. He had 14 carries, 68 yards, had a touchdown on top of it. And then pretty much after that, Evan Ingram had a touchdown. He had 5 receptions for 48 yards. Pretty much at this point, those teams are just trying to do their best to get at least somewhat competitive in the NFC East. So they're really only a game or a game and a half out of first place. So technically those teams could actually still make a run. But we'll see where it goes. So the Giants beat Washington 23-20. Move on to the Ravens versus the Colts. Ravens beat the Colts 24-10. To be honest with you, this game kind of played out similar to how I thought. I thought the score would have been a little bit closer, but Baltimore won by 2 touchdowns. Lamar Jackson looked okay. He did have a rushing touchdown, and he had a decent day passing. He only had 4 incompletions in the game, but only threw for 170 yards. So offensively, they struggled, but they were able to get enough on the offensive side of the ball to win. Their defense, however, was outstanding. Their defense pretty much locked down Phillip Rivers and the Colts. I mean, as a team, they didn't even get 100. They barely got 100 yards rushing. Even if they did, it wasn't by much. Phillip Rivers looked old. There's no other way to say that. He looked old. I really thought that the Ravens would really make it difficult for the Colts. And they pretty much lived up to that prediction. And I remember, I think it was at the end of the second quarter, I remember they had to put in Jacoby Brissett to throw a Hail Mary just because Phillip Rivers just doesn't have the arm strength to get it there anymore. So it's kind of indicative of the day that he had. So we'll see what happens with Phillip Rivers. I think that he could bounce back from that, but I know a lot of Colts fans were not impressed with what Philip Rivers did for them last Sunday. And like I said, the Ravens win 24-10. Moving on to the Vikings versus the Lions. So the Vikings won 34-20. And this was a game kind of similar to last week. Dalvin Cook was a one-man show once again. He had 22 carries, 206 yards, and had 2 rushing touchdowns. He was unstoppable again. I think like the last 2 weeks, he's had 6 touchdowns. He's had I think around 400 yards rushing. He's been an absolute monster the last 2 weeks. Not only that, they actually did get some decent play from Kirk Cousins as well. So he threw a touchdown to Amir Abdullah and then threw 2 touchdowns to Irv Smith Jr. So he definitely improved his play from last week as well. And then the Lions just had a tough day. Matt Stafford had a touchdown but threw 2 picks. And he was able to play after coming off the COVID list before. I think he came off the COVID list on Saturday, if I remember right. Ends up going out of the game. Apparently he went out with a concussion. And it did seem like they missed the presence of Kenny Golladay. So just kind of looking at the receiving stats here. They got some decent play from Danny Amendola. Had 7 receptions, 77 yards. Marvin Jones had a couple catches. TJ Hawkinson had a couple catches. I think Jones and Hawkinson had a touchdown each. But the Lions defense just really couldn't stop Dalvin Cook. And they were already giving up close to 120 to 130 yards a game on the ground anyway. And Dalvin Cook just absolutely smashed them. And the Vikings get the dub here, 34-20. So moving on, we'll move on to the Titans versus the Bears. So the Titans got the win 24-17. Just looking at the stats here, I actually thought that the Bears defense actually held the Titans in check here. Derrick Henry only had 68 rushing yards. They held Ryan Tannehill to 158 yards passing. He only had 2 touchdowns. The only person they really couldn't stop was A.J. Brown, but he only had 4 catches for 100 yards and 1 touchdown. And it's getting to the point with the Bears where I think the defense has to feel like they're carrying too much weight for this team. Because offensively, they're just not getting it done. I mean, Nick Foles threw the ball 52 times. The likelihood that you're going to win a game when you throw the ball 52 times is very low to begin with. Now, they did make somewhat of a rushing attempt, an attempt to run the ball somewhat, if you're comparing that to the Bucs. So, I mean, overall, I think they had close to about 20 carries, but they couldn't get anything going on the ground. So the Titans defense definitely stepped up there. But, yeah, when you have to throw the ball 52 times, now, granted, he didn't turn the ball over. Nick Foles didn't turn the ball over, which certainly helped. But this team offensively, it's just tough to watch. Really, the only playmaker on the offensive side of the ball for the Bears is Allen Robinson. He had a decent day, had 7 catches, 81 yards. Jimmy Graham had a decent day, had 6 catches, 55 yards, and a touchdown as well. But it hurts to watch the Bears play sometimes. The defense is the only thing to really watch on that team. Offensively, it just hurts to watch them. But Titans get the win here. They moved to 6-2. And they won by the score of 24-17. So we'll move on to the Seahawks versus the Bills. So the Seahawks won. The Bills won 44-34. Now this was a game where I really thought that, despite the fact that Seattle's defense is pretty bad. Actually, if I looked up a stat earlier that they are the worst passing defense in NFL history up to this point. They're giving up close to about 340 to 350 yards passing every single game. And in 6 of the 8 games that they've played in, they've given up 300 yards passing. I mean, they damn near gave up 400 yards passing to Cam Newton in the second week of the season. And Cam Newton barely struggles to hit 200 yards against anybody the last couple of weeks. So that's kind of indicative of how bad that defense is. And it really showed here, giving up 44 points to Josh Allen and the offense. Josh Allen had a hell of a day. 31 to 38. Threw for 415 yards, had 3 touchdowns. And the offense was just on fire the entire day. Stephon Diggs had almost 10 catches for 120 yards. John Brown had 8 catches for about 100 yards. And then, even though that they didn't get much they didn't run the ball as much, they were still able to get 1 rushing touchdown from Zach Moss. This is the only thing about this team that I wish that they would try to do a little bit more, is run the ball. Because they do put too much pressure on Josh Allen. Because if he's throwing 35 to 40 times a game, basically your team just becomes a little bit too one-dimensional. But in this case, it worked out simply because that's how bad the Seahawks defense is. And to kind of flip it back onto the Seahawks here, Russell didn't have the best game. Russell Wilson was 28 to 41, did throw for 390 yards, but he had 2 interceptions. And he has to essentially be perfect on the offensive side of the ball to get them games. Because if he doesn't, you're going to get results like this, because the defense is not going to hold up for that long. The defense is going to be lucky to hold the opposing team to under 30 points. And that's with Jamal Adams coming back into the lineup for Seattle. It didn't really matter that much. And not only that, they didn't even really try to run the ball as much. As a team, I think they only had 17 carries and only had about 50 to 55 yards rushing. So that just kind of shows where the team is just offensively. Now, they didn't have Chris Carson and they didn't have Carlos Hyde, so they were down to their 3rd-string running back. So that I do understand. And they were trying to dig themselves. They were trying to dig themselves out of a hole because they were down early. But you can't just completely abandon the run. But yeah, Russell Wilson essentially has to be perfect at this point moving forward, because that defense is god awful. So wrap it up. Bills win 44-34. Move on to the Chiefs versus the Panthers. This is actually one of the most competitive games of the week, and it kind of surprised me. I thought that the Chiefs were going to pretty much run away with this one. I thought they would have won somewhere in between like 7 to 10 points. But I'll tell you what, the Panthers are a very gritty team, and I like it. Their record may not show it, but they are competitive and they fight to the end. Teddy Bridgewater had a solid day, threw for 300 yards, had 2 touchdowns, and honestly had a very good chance to get them close to winning the football game at the last like 30 seconds of the game. Now, I wish they would have gotten a little bit closer for the field goal opportunity to win them the game. I think the guy ended up, I forget the field goal kicker's name, but he ended up trying to kick a 67-yard field goal, which would have been an NFL record. But he ended up missing it, and just to kind of mention the fact, the guy actually had enough leg on the field goal attempt. He just missed it to the right. So if he gets 5 to 10 more yards, if Teddy Bridgewater gets 5 to 10 more yards to get the field goal kicker into position, Panthers might have won that game, but they ended up losing that one. And just to kind of flip it back on the Chiefs here, Mahomes had a great day, and I think people are just completely ignoring the fact that this guy is he's amazing. There's no other way to say that. 372 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, and it just seems like a ho-hum day. And that's the thing, like, where if it seems like just a regular day where he's throwing for 350 yards plus, he puts 3 or 4 touchdowns on top of it, and people just say, it's just a typical day for Patrick Mahomes, that's when you know you are one of the best. And at this point, he is the MVP leader. Because Tom Brady took a hit. Russell Wilson took a hit in the MVP race last week with their performances. So at this point right now, Patrick Mahomes is the MVP leader at this point. Anybody that says anything different, I think at this point is just lying to themselves. Patrick Mahomes is just an amazing football player. It showed again. And the Panthers get the win here, the Chiefs get the win here, 33-31. So we'll move on. We're going to talk about the Broncos versus the Falcons. So the Falcons won 34-27. Kind of similar to what I thought when I made my picks last weekend. I thought the Falcons would get this one, and I thought Matt Ryan would have a decent day just because of AJ Boye's absence for Denver's defense, and it definitely showed. So Matt Ryan had 284 yards passing, had 3 touchdowns, did have 1 interception, but the one guy I did not expect to have one of the best days of his career. I'm going to do my best to pronounce his name. This guy's name is Olamide Zacchaeus. I'm not going to try to say anything different about his name. I probably screwed up his name, but I don't care. He had 4 catches, 103 yards, added a touchdown as well. They got decent production from Hayden Hurst, had 7 catches for 62 yards. Julio Jones chipped in for 5 receptions, 54 yards, and added a touchdown as well. They got an okay day from Todd Gurley, had 20 carries, 53 yards, but did have a rushing touchdown. So Falcons did exactly what I thought they would. Their defense did give up some points to Drew Lock. Drew Lock had 313 yards passing, had 2 touchdowns and an interception. He also did have a rushing touchdown as well. Jerry Jeudy had a great day, 7 catches, 125 yards, and a touchdown as well. But just not enough to get the win here. Falcons win 34-27. So we'll move on. We'll talk about the Raiders versus the Chargers. So the Raiders win a very close game against the Chargers, 31-26. I remember I was watching the end of this game at Ray J before we ended up watching the Bucs versus the Saints, and it was a really close game. And I'll tell you what, Justin Herbert really got that team within. They had the game. The last play of the game, Justin Herbert throws just a quick little fade route to the corner, and it was a perfect pass. Guy catches it, but as he's falling out of bounds, I believe the corner that he was matched up against did get a hand in there to kind of lodge the ball out just enough where he lands out of bounds and the ball moves. They originally called it a touchdown on the initial play, but when they reviewed it, they overturned it because they saw the ball move. So the Raiders ended up getting the win on that play. But overall, I thought both teams played pretty well overall. So Justin Herbert, 326 yards passing, 2 touchdowns. Derek Carr had a decent day, 165 yards, 2 touchdowns. So very close game. It's a very close divisional match here. The Chargers, man, it's been tough the last 2 weeks, the way that they've lost. Had a really devastating loss to the Broncos last week, and just as devastating as a loss here because they had the game, and that guy just could not control the ball enough at the end of the game to win it. And the Chargers moved to 2-6, and the Raiders moved to 5-3, and the Raiders get the win here, 31-26. So we'll move on to the Dolphins versus the Cardinals. This was honestly the biggest surprise for me of the week. I did not expect the Dolphins to go into Arizona and get the win, but they did. They won 34-31. I thought Tua looked impressive for his second start in the league. Throws 248 yards, 2 touchdowns, basically threw 75%, was accurate with 75% of his passes. I was really impressed with what Tua did in his second start in the league. I mean, they put up 34 points on the offensive side of the ball in his second game. That shows me that they do trust this kid, and it's showing on the scoreboard. And not only that, just to kind of flip it on the Cardinals here, I thought Kyler Murray had a decent game as well. 283 yards passing, 3 touchdowns. I think he threw over 85% of it. He was accurate for 80 to 85% of his passes. So he did just fine. And not only that, he had 106 yards rushing and added a touchdown as well. So he had quite a day. Christian Kirk had a decent day, had 5 catches, 123 yards, and a touchdown. DeAndre Hopkins pretty much got locked up for most of the day, only had 3 catches and 30 yards. But close game here, but the Dolphins get the win here, 34-31. So we'll move on to the Steelers versus the Cowboys. So the Steelers, in really a close game, only win 24-19. kind of disappointed in the Steelers here. I really thought that the Steelers would really step up here and just annihilate the Cowboys. But the Cowboys were super competitive. They had Garrett Gilbert, who was their fourth-string quarterback. And there were points in the game where Garrett Gilbert looked like Tom Brady. The guy was playing outstanding, especially in that first half. That first half, he looked impressive. He looked confident. And the team was winning. They were up, at one point in the first half, they were up 13-3. And he looked just fine. And then the second half, the Steelers made a comeback. Definitely got the game close. Definitely made the game close at the end, and then the Steelers were able to pull away in the fourth quarter. So in the fourth quarter, they outscored Dallas 15-0. It gave them the edge in the end. I thought Ben Roethlisberger had a solid day. I know he got cracked on one of the passing plays that he had late in the second quarter. He got sandwiched in between two Cowboys defenders. Definitely got shaken up there, but was able to bounce back. 306 yards passing, had 3 touchdowns. Running the ball, Steelers really didn't run that much. Pretty much the Cowboys locked them down as far as the running game goes. But they got good plays. They got good playmakers on the receiving side of the ball. Juju Smith-Schuster had 6 catches, 93 yards, and a touchdown. Deontay Johnson had 6 receptions for 77 yards. Chase Claypool had 8 catches for 69 yards. So they were definitely able to get some good production from their receivers, and it ended up being the difference. And to a certain extent, the Steelers' defense stepped up when it needed to. In the second half, they only gave up 6 points and pretty much locked down Garrett Gilbert and that offense. Close game here. I really thought that the Steelers would really pull away in this one, but the score says otherwise. Steelers win here 24-19. So moving on, we'll move on to the Patriots and the Jets. I don't want to even talk about the Saints and the Bucs anymore. I already went through that. So Patriots, they played last night against the Jets, and they won a very close divisional matchup, 30-27. And just kind of looking back at this game, I really thought that the Patriots were going to lose this one. And it would have just capped off just the week of football if the Patriots lost to the winless Jets. Had that happened, I might have just taken the week off from football. Not only do I see my favorite quarterback get absolutely smashed by the Saints on Sunday Night Football in person, and then follow it up with the Pats losing to the worst team in football, that would have been a difficult one to recover from, and that one would have just been tough to witness. But Cam Newton pulled up and did what he needed to do, and in that fourth quarter, I thought he was sensational. He was able to lead the Pats on multiple scoring drives. He was able to get them into scoring position on the 3 drives that they had in the fourth quarter. Got 2 field goals and a touchdown, and led them on their drive to set up the game-winning field goal. Nick Folk hit a 51-yard field goal, and they end up getting the win. So, looking at, just kind of to finish this up with the Patriots, I thought the second half is really where they won the game, because just looking at the score here, the Jets were fine in the third quarter. They were able to score a touchdown with, I think it's Brashard Perriman. But in the fourth quarter, the Patriots absolutely took over. If I remember right, I think the Jets only had 4 plays of offense in the entire fourth quarter. They had Joe Flacco threw an interception to J.C. Jackson, and then they had a 3-and-out with about 4.5 minutes left. And then after that, it was all Patriots. The Patriots dominated the time of possession in the second half. It was like 22 minutes to 8 minutes of possession in the second half. Patriots absolutely rolled in that department in the second half. And it showed, because they were able to get really good drives. And that first drive in the fourth quarter it took like 7 minutes off the clock. And it only resulted in a touchdown. But it was really indicative of how well that the Patriots were managing the clock, and they were able to do just enough to get the win. I thought Jacoby Myers had a great day as well. He had 12 catches, 169 yards. No touchdowns, but really a standout day for him. and I'm glad that I had him. He pretty much won me my fantasy game this past week. So him getting like 28 points of fantasy, I definitely appreciate that. So, like I said, Patriots get the win there, 30-27. They move to 3-5, and the Jets move to 0-9. So that'll wrap up the NFL Week 9 recap. We're going to move on to the college football top 10 here. So, had some good games to watch this past weekend. Really, the game of the week that I thought was Clemson versus Notre Dame. That was the matchup of the week. It was an outstanding performance from both teams. However, Notre Dame, in double overtime, gets a win against Clemson. And as it stands right now, Notre Dame is now the number 2 team in the country, only behind Alabama. And it's no surprise that Alabama moved up to number 1. They've been impressive the entire season. And just to kind of go down the top 10 here, like I said, Alabama's number 1, Notre Dame's number 2, Ohio State's number 3. Clemson moves down to number 4, which is basically kind of what I expected. They went up against Notre Dame with a backup quarterback, and the backup quarterback performed extremely well. And it would have been really impressive for Clemson to get that win against Notre Dame. But they ended up losing a really close one and moved down to number 4. Texas A&M is number 5. Florida's number 6 after a really, really great win against Georgia on the road. That was honestly the game there was another game of the week that I thought the Gators they played extremely well. I thought offensively they looked outstanding in the first half. In the second half they kind of cooled off, but the defense was able to get some turnovers in the second half, and that was really the game changer. So as it stands, Florida's number 6, Cincinnati's number 7, BYU is number 8, the Hurricanes are number 9, and the Indiana Hoosiers are the number 10 team in the country. I remember I was talking about this with one of my supervisors, one of my old supervisors from work. He used to live in Indiana, and I remember I was texting him like, is Indiana that good? Like, Indiana is the number 10 team in the country, and I guess I was just kind of late to the party on how good Indiana is. Now, in the Big Ten, it's not going to matter much because Ohio State's going to roll through that whole conference anyway. But the fact that you got Indiana at number 10 is just really, really surprising to me. And at this point, they deserve it. They're a very good team, and they've played well these last couple weeks. So, pretty much at that point, that'll wrap up the top 10 for the college football top 10. And then really what we're going to do is we're just going to wrap up the episode here with some NBA news. So a couple days ago, I'm a little bit late on this, but the NBA and the NBA Players Association were able to come to an agreement to start the season on December 22nd. So just kind of some key points for the upcoming NBA season. So instead of an 82-game season, there will be a 72-game season, and that will start on December 22nd. The season will finish up before the Olympics next year. So the Olympics were supposed to be this year, but because of coronavirus, they were pushed off till next year. So really the NBA is trying to make sure that they finish the season before the Olympics. That way it gives the players that are going to play in the Olympics a chance to somewhat recover, I guess, from the season. Not only that, we got training camp starting in December 1st. Free agency should be coming fairly soon. I would imagine that free agency is probably going to start within the next 2 weeks or so, because there's really not that much time left as far as the offseason goes. And then as it stands right now, the plan is that there won't be any fans in the arenas just because of coronavirus at this point. I think in the NFL you can kind of get away with it because most of the stadiums are outside. That's not the case in the NBA. All of those are indoors. I think at this point, the safe expectation is that there won't be any fans in the stands for the foreseeable future in NBA games. I think it may get to a point where you might see limited capacity in these arenas, probably in the later part of winter, maybe the early part of spring. It really just kind of depends on where this whole COVID situation goes. If there's a huge spike in cases, obviously they're not going to allow anybody to watch the games in the stands. And it's going to be interesting to see how really these teams are able to combat the corona issue, because if you kind of look at the NFL has had numerous spikes in cases on multiple teams throughout their league. And I don't know if the NBA is going to do something similar to what they did as far as creating a bubble. I just don't think they're going to be able to do that, just because I think it's going to be too difficult for the players and the teams. I don't think they're going to be able to replicate that on a mass scale unless they do something like that for the playoffs again. But for the whole NBA season, I think they're going to just play in empty arenas. And it's just going to be extremely difficult to manage it if that's the case, because there's going to be COVID cases on these teams. It'll just be interesting to see how these teams are able to combat it and deal with it as the season goes on. So that's where basically everything stands on the NBA season at this point. I do like the fact that the games are starting before Christmas Day. I always like watching the NBA games on Christmas Day. So it'll be fun to see that on Christmas. So with that said, we're just going to wrap up the episode there. I want to thank you guys for tuning into the episode today. I just kind of look forward for the next episode. We'll definitely be going over the NFL Week 10 matchups. Just go down the list of games. Might make some predictions going into next week for the games. And then pretty much at this point, I'm definitely going to have to start focusing on college football, just because really at this point in the year, it's really only the NFL and college football at this point. So definitely expect some college football talk as well. And then after that, we'll see where it goes. But once again, thank you guys for tuning in, and see you around.